This is a story of history in action, of a summer weekend at Kirby Hall with Britain's finest reenactment societies. A story which brings you highlights of an event which peopled these fields for 2 long, hot days. For English heritage, the country's main national body responsible for heritage conservation, History in Action at Kirby Hall is the most ambitious project of the year devised by the Special Events team. For 12 months, they have been planning and organizing a program which spans history from the 1st to the 20th centuries. A celebration which draws participants and spectators from home and away. And one of the more spectacular gatherings is the Roman army display. It's an event which for the first time brings together reenactors from all over the country and joins them with a group from the Netherlands. Cavalry support is provided by the troop. For the spectators, it's probably the first time for almost 2,000 years to see such a large and authentic detachment of Roman soldiers.
The army that conquered the mightiest empire in the history of the world at that time. It was in fact the first world
In the 1st century AD, the Roman army was the most powerful force in the world, conquering a vast empire.
The body armour is called voricus segmentata. It's made of strips of metal, which are riveted internally to leather straps. Make the armour very flexible, and it means that the men can wear it while digging entrenchments and roads in enemy territory.
At its heart was the Roman legion, the panzer division of the ancient world, with around 5,000 heavily armed soldiers. Each was armed with throwing javelins, a stabbing sword, and for last-ditch defense, a small dagger. Their armor was worn over a woolen tunic, and their feet clad in hobnailed sandals. For protection, they wore body armor made from segmented iron hoops, a helmet with neck and cheek guards, and carried a rectangular shield to fend off attacking blows. Formidable in battle, the legionaries were augmented by auxiliaries, who were less elaborately armed and usually carried a spear and oval shield.
Using a bow and arrow, but also he's learned how to use the weapon, which will be...
The Romans treated their enemies extremely harshly, and in a pitched battle you could expect no mercy at all. You had two choices when faced with the Romans in battle: surrender or run like hell.
Probably the most famous of Roman military tactics is the testudo, the tortoise. It's not actually used on the battlefield, but rather in sieges as a mobile shelter for engineers. The troops cover their heads and sides with a wall of shields and march right up to the enemy gates. Then, while the testudo formation remains still, engineers move beneath its cover, smashing or burning a way through the fortification ahead of them. Artillery support came from throwing machines, capable of laying down a massive barrage of stones or missiles. Cavalry assisted the Roman foot soldiers. Skilled riders, they were armed with spears, protected by shields, and equipped with long slashing swords. Although stirrups had not been invented, a special saddle with a wooden horn in each corner held the rider firmly in place. great speed, they could charge down opponents, pursue and destroy a retreating force, or venture over long distances on scouting mission. But in the end, what characterized the Roman army was discipline. It was a professional, drilled army, very different from the opponents they met, often poorly armed and ragged in organization and tactics, a distinct disadvantage against the precision combat practiced by the Romans, and recreated in a blaze of color at Kirby Hall. While the battles raged, tucked away in Kirby's courtyard, another part of history in action was quietly underway. In the historical traders' market, over 50 craft workers made and sold specialist items to visitors and reenactors alike. After all, an army from whatever period of time doesn't just march on its stomach. Nothing less than a top-quality pair of reproduction shoes, handmade in the authentic manner, will do. And if you're quick on your feet, there's punching of belts, buckskin for bags, braiding for breeches, and lots of what's tanned in between. But for some, enduring the heat of the day, the perils of mortal combat, or the last meal of spit roast hog, proved just too much. Clothed by one market trader, armed by another, embellished by your own capability to research and manufacture accurate reproduction items, reenactors' thoughts often turn to a living history encampment.
How are we doing, guys? That's all right then. Real or?
Real.
After all, how can you, or those who come to see you, discover what it might have been like in the past, unless, for a few days, you live on site, cooking, trading, feeding, and even sleeping, as far as possible, in the authentic manner. Won't the opportunity to trade and share with your fellow reenactors enhance your store of historical knowledge? And you're never too young to begin to uncover the secrets of the past, even if a weekend of leisure turns out to be days of enjoyable toil. Who minds working fingers to the bone throughout a long hot day and on into the candlelit evening, if you're making and mending in the style of centuries beyond the reach of living memory? At least a weekend spent in a historical encampment is unlikely to cause you physical danger. A lot less hazardous than appearing on the battlefield to take on a Saxon or Viking warrior. After the Roman Empire fell in the 6th century, the art of warfare changed considerably. No longer was a central government providing arms and equipment for soldiers that were trained and drilled. This was now the age of the warrior.
Particularly large, they're very effective in cutting arrow shots.
By the 9th and 10th centuries, the warrior tradition of the early medieval period was firmly established. By the time the Vikings swept in from the sea to conquer much of England, warfare had become less sophisticated, but was just as bloody and devastating. Fortunately, in this particular combat, no one suffered more than just a little light bruising. But if the battlefield was left to warriors and soldiers, elsewhere in the grounds of Kirby Hall, a large confederation of medieval societies came together to form a huge 15th century encampment. This was life for a soldier on campaign. When a medieval army formed and set off, it drew in its wake a train of camp followers, ready and willing to service all its bodily and spiritual needs. Here in the encampment would have been a ragtag and bobtail army which included families, cooks, priests, and even traders and armourers, ready to supply you with goods equal to your wealth and status.
And they would have been of this form, and that's a sort of medium weight bodkin. The heaviest bodkins can have heads on them about this long, they weigh up to 2 ounces. Long, slim ones are very effective against mail, but in our period, this sort of armour is now much more common. And so you need something that will penetrate plate, and that will penetrate plate at a distance of about 50 metres. And with the heavy poundage bows of the time, within 100 metres you don't.
Amongst the arms manufactured for English soldiers in the 15th century was the vicious bill. Originally an agricultural implement for hedging, it was soon adapted as a weapon, using the cutting edges and stabbing points for bloody hand-to-hand combat. In the 15th century, soldiers marched into battle wearing the livery of the lord they served, kept in time by the musicians who accompanied them. But they were seldom expected to march in step. As the day progressed, history in action provided glimpses of the English Civil War.
Duties dismissed.
By the 17th century, the development and use of gunpowder had revolutionized warfare. Soldiers in the English Civil War had the capacity to kill at a distance, with musket and cannon, and were part of an army that had rediscovered organization and drill from ancient texts.
The next time I can remember. It might be quite a while, so you might be next year when you get
Safe.
when you get the ribbon cuts for this, could be sometime next year, but you're going to get them.
A Civil War foot regiment would consist of musketeers and pikemen. While drummers relayed orders and kept the company in step, fifes often played the marching tune. Pikemen went into battle heavily armoured and carrying 16-foot-long ash pikes to create a hedge of spear points. They protected the musketeers from an enemy cavalry while they reloaded or fought other pikemen. Cannons added to an army's firepower, but at Kirby Hall, without breaking any of the ancient windows. Compared with the booming of the guns, the historic encampments provided displays of a different kind.
Now the instruments I have here, a new invention of the Renaissance coming back from Italy during the time of Henry VIII,
The music of medieval and Tudor England demonstrated and explained live and in its original context.
And all virginals work by pressing a key, and the mechanism inside comes up and plucks the strings. In much the same way as a harp would pluck the string. So this is effectively an automated harp. And a bigger sister of the same family of instruments is known as a harpsichord, which not only is bigger, but also has its strings laid in a different way.
Perhaps the greatest feature of the History in Action event is the potential it releases for being entertained and yet discovering something new. Tucked away in quiet corners of Kirby Hall is the unexpected.
Your right hand! Counter! March!
Even a car park is pressed into service as a rehearsal ground when an English Civil War regiment needs to practice its marching and counter-marching.
Right on my mark! Counter march! My mark! Counter march! Counter!
The roar and clamour of battlefield demonstrations is not a place for the unrehearsed. But while the soldiers battle on, reenactors from their encampments turn back to the craft market to meet, greet, and swap ideas for the next event. And as any reenactor will tell you, to get ahead, you must get yourself a hat. Sometimes, in a quest for extra information, visitors find themselves involved in yet another battle.
The only out-of-season battle that we do is the Battle of Nantwich, and that's because the original battle was fought on the 25th of January, and it was a right hodgepodge of a battle as well, because the Royalists thought we're going to stamp out these parliamentarian vermin in our backyard, so they massed all around the town. Now, the town itself has a river running through it, the River Weaver, and because of the winter, it was down to a basic trickle. But overnight, there was a thaw in the Welsh hills, so it turned into a torrent and burst its banks at many places, scattered all the Royalist armies, and then the Roundheads just went out afterwards and bish bash bosh, put them to rights.
While behind the scenes, a redcoat drummer leads the rehearsal of a military march.
Once again. 1, 2.
By now, on the approaches to the display fields, the 18th century soldiers of King George were making their way into battle.
Very popular, fighting drums carry well pressure, noise, very, very effective, good for keeping morale of troops up. Then we have 2 blocks of infantry coming on, representing 2 separate eras. The first.
By 1776, the time of the American War of Independence, British soldiers were distinguished by their bright tunics, high gaiters, and the famous Brown Bess flintlock musket they carried. To us, used to a world of rapid fire, it seems odd that in the 18th century, you were probably not far off more than 2 rounds a minute. But warfare was slow and deliberate. Perhaps because of the power of Hollywood, one of the best-known eras of history is the American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865. The struggle between the Confederate forces of the South and the Union Army of the North. Defending a system based on the slavery which served cotton and agricultural production, the Southern states banded together to fight for independence from the Union.
Come and sing a song tomorrow.
Marching out to war in assorted grey uniforms, they appeared ramshackle and ill-equipped. Though in reality they were tough soldiers and well led by their generals, more than a match for the Union forces.
Order! Order! Oh! In place! In place! Rest! Anybody want a blanket?
Yes, please, sir.
You all right there, brother, will we?
The Yankees, well equipped and dressed in dark blue uniforms, struggled to make ground in the early stages of the war. But what had really transformed the fighting was the change from smoothbore flintlock musket to high-powered percussion rifle, able to hit accurately targets hundreds of yards away. The battle tactics, lines of soldiers drawn up only 100 yards from each other, were out of date for the new firepower, and unsurprisingly, casualties were enormous. Life in the Victorian encampment may have been less glamorous, but when you're busy recreating the past over a weekend, there's still plenty to share and discover.
Transport separately, so they weren't expected to. If you like to step underneath the barrier, they duck underneath the rope. Just come here. Just come to the side. That'll do. Now, it's just stand there. Now. That's the kit and equipment that you would carry with you.
Like a
so if you want to put it on like it's a rucksack, it'll obviously hang far too low on you. But that's what you would have carried with you.
Is it heavy?
Done up. Do you find it very heavy?
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what you've got on the front are 2 pouches for your ammunition. They're fairly uncomfortable. Got that right? It's not too bad a fit on you, is it? Actually. And then you would be expected to balance that, although obviously it would be under a bit of a tension on your chin.
The electric telegraph of the 19th century was hardly an online connection to the internet, but it was the beginning of a communications technology which would revolutionize the course of warfare. It's easy to forget that the horse was used extensively in war, right the way from the Romans through to the early part of the 20th century. The armoured knight on horseback represented the high point of medieval chivalry. Cromwell's disciplined Ironsides swung the English Civil War towards victory against the king. And throughout every period of history, there was a whole industry dedicated to meeting the need for stabling, feeding, and grooming. But perhaps the most glorious time of the horse in war was the Napoleonic period, when massed regiments of cavalry would be used by Napoleon, thrown against the enemy like tank divisions of the 20th century. Cavalry was also used by the Victorians, whose stable uniform is worn here when looking after and preparing horses. Ornate full-dress uniform was worn on special occasions. In this case, the 17th Lancers are dressed as they would have been for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. By 1915, a year after the start of the First World War, combat uniform was substantially different. As weaponry advanced, so did tactics, and less conspicuous uniform became all important.
As you can see, because of the accuracy of these weapons, nobody can afford to wear bright colours anymore. So the British Army now have taken up khaki uniform.
The British Army, at the start of World War I, was able to fire 15 aim rounds per man per minute, a rate of fire which devastated the German army at Mons.
The majority of them are wearing the 1908 patent web equipment, an excellent piece of equipment. The ammunition on this equipment is carried in 42 sections.
But whatever the capability of one man and his rifle, it was nothing compared to the killing power of the new machine gun.
The whistle indicates that they have actually come under supposed fire from the German army. And also very highly trained riflemen, and could easily pick up these men quickly. The idea is that the enemy, if you don't hit your section, gives up fire, while the other section gets up and moves forward. And you can see that they hit slowly for each other. That means that they are less likely to be hit by enemy gunfire.
21 years after the Great War had ended, Britain and Germany were plunged into the Second World War, in the early autumn of 1939. Uncanny then to see highly detailed British and German encampments side by side in the grounds of Kirby Hall, complete with tents, vehicles and arms. For the visitor, there's not just the smell of rations being cooked on a paraffin stove, the clatter of weapons being broken apart, cleaned and reassembled, but even the hiss and crackle of a wistful song, trickling reedily from the old equipment on display. It seems almost incredible that it's possible to collect up and preserve so much equipment from a war which ended 50 years ago. But if the terrifying power of weapons and armor in the Second World War tells us anything, it's of the speed with which technology had pushed the boundaries of warfare. Barely a century ago, soldiers tackled each other almost face to face. By 1939, armies usually engaged each other from a huge distance. It was possible to inflict massive casualties without even seeing the enemy you were fighting. And now, the Second World War demonstration begins. 50-year-old vehicles, carefully nursed back to life throughout the winter months, painstakingly painted in their camouflage colors, crank into life and bear troops onto the battlefield. It is 1941. The Wehrmacht positioned themselves to wait in ambush for the combined British and American invasion forces. You've seen it all on film 100 times, accompanied by a blaze of special effects. But somehow, here in the drowsy heat of a midsummer afternoon, it all seems much more brutal and uncomfortably real. As the American and British soldiers move into the jaws of a German ambush, we anxiously await the attack. the battle draws to a conclusion. For some of the older spectators, a vivid reminder of combat they not only remember, but may well have experienced for themselves. Now, it's one thing to collect up arms and artifacts from a mid-20th century war, but quite another to research and manufacture authentic body armor for medieval enthusiasts. Still, at least there's no shortage of potential buyers. And if you're in the market for a Tudor sword, it's worth listening to an expert. Remembering, of course, that technological obsolescence was probably unheard of in the 16th century. If a sword made in one century is still useful in the next, why change it?
Actually, the daggers are interesting as well. Yeah. I mean, Civil War, yeah, that's perfectly acceptable for 1630s, 1640s. Yeah, they were used until about 1650. Yeah, but for us, that's right in the period. So certain things do cross over the periods. Yeah, swords tend not to. Yeah, because most people have got like rapiers and things like that, and rapiers were around in the period like that, are more typical of the English militia, which is what we're trying to portray, of course. So we're not soldiers, we're militiamen.
But then again, you may be more interested in a bit of inside information about Roman life.
You know the oils and the strigil. If you were going to the baths, you would have taken your oil flask. It was especially made for me for a display. You would have used it for your hair, to comb your hair, and also to use as a comb. Now I've got the pins, which would keep my hair up. I think whoever made it was a bit sadistic, because if I ever push my head back, I sort of stab myself in the neck.
Originally, the Greeks had what they call a belly bow, which a gastrophates, which is is pulled in very much like a crossbow. And the Romans went on and used things like that as well. But went on through the ages. There's nothing new under the sun. Really.
Inside Kirby Hall was a whole tribe of traders willing to sell anything from books to buttons, from beads to braid. Materials fit to trim an authentic historical costume in just the right style. And all to a selection of hits from medieval and Tudor England. But it's not just from the things we wear and do at a special event like this that we can catch a glimpse of our past. An artist's impression captured on film or in paint can remind us of the spirit and atmosphere of what we've seen and experienced. And so to the finale, with drums and pipes, on foot and horse. From every corner of the display field, the troops arrive to bid their audience farewell.
Spontaneous applause there for some of our Roman troops as they build up. Very nice of you. Re-enactors on the field, with the seal knot marching another 200 on just now. Here they come. What an amazing sight. The medieval troops move up. And the captain of the medieval company orders that the field pieces be brought to the front.
Roman troops with gleaming armour and brightly painted shields. Saxons and Vikings, united in common purpose. Medieval and Tudor companies in coloured livery and with rippling banners. The drums, fifes and massed pikes of the English Civil War.
Musketeers kneel, the soldiers put their flags in salute. And charge them. The sealed knot.
The famous redcoats of King George. Yankee and rebel forces from the American Civil War. The soldiers that defended Queen Victoria's empire. The military strength of 2 world wars. For these are the volunteers bringing 2,000 years of history to life across a long summer weekend at Kirby Hall. A story of history in action.
And onwards, at full gun, ladies and gentlemen, the next cavalry of the troops, the first night of all, and our followed rapidly by the lancers, and the lancers crossing in view. Now, could I invite everybody here with muskets and rifles to load in your own time for one mass volley. All troops load.